Greetings, parasite ecologists. In this lecture, we're leaving the phylum Platyhelminthes behind, and we're moving on to the phylum Nematoda. Let me give you a brief introduction to the nematodes. These worms are totally amazing. Now, I know I say that about all the parasites because there are reasons to love each clade that we study. But the nematodes are especially impressive for their toughness. The nematodes are also called roundworms. For a lot of people, they are exactly the image that immediately comes to mind when someone says the word parasite. However, the phylum Nematoda doesn't just have parasites in it. There are also many, many free-living species. There's a favorite saying among nematode biologists that if you just erased all the matter on Earth that isn't nematode biomass, you'd still have a faint outline of everything that you just erased. And that's because the nematodes are extremely abundant. They're found everywhere. There are free-living nematodes in soil and on surfaces, and parasitic nematodes in plants, animals, and other hosts. They might be mostly teeny tiny, but they are distributed over the entire surface of the Earth, and putting them all together, they make up an extremely large amount of biomass. When they are parasitic, nematodes are parasites of both plants and animals, and they are absolutely tough as nails. These parasites are not the floppy, goopy, mostly immobile flatworms that we've been covering so far. They are muscular, and they have a tough cuticle, and they're highly mobile. They are really good biters and suckers, and they're very resistant to lots of different kinds of environmental conditions that would immediately kill a flatworm. This bad boy is Heterodera glycinus, a devastating parasite of plants, and specifically of soybean plants. And you can see it here in a colorized scanning electron micrograph sitting just next to its gigantic egg. Here's the basic anatomy of a nematode. You can see that it has a complete digestive tract, which includes both a mouth and an anus, a difference from the flatworms that we've looked at so far. The whole anterior portion of the animal is just basically adapted for sucking. Nematodes sometimes have piercing mouth parts, sometimes they have teeth, and they often have a really strong esophagus that's meant to create the strong suction needed to draw food into the body. Ingested food is processed through the gut tract and then expelled out the anus after it's been processed. And this kind of makes the nematodes like a tube within a tube. They have the tube of their intestinal tract inside the tube of their body. The reproductive tract is also a tube within a tube. Nematodes have a pseudocoelom containing hemolymph, meaning they have a kind of a body cavity that has the nematode equivalent of blood just circulating around inside an open circulatory system. They have a non-cellular cuticle. The cuticle is the covering on the outside of the nematodes, and it's part of what makes nematodes very tough. Remember how I mentioned that the nematodes are really mobile? They can actually move pretty fast, and there's a reason for this. The flatworms are floppy, but the nematodes have that tough cuticle. And they use that cuticle to create a hydrostatic skeleton, just like jellyfish or other invertebrate animals that manage to be really mobile without a spine. The internal pressure of the fluids or hemolymph inside of the nematode's cuticle makes the animal turgid or stiff and allows its muscles to work against the cuticle to produce movement in the same way that our muscles work against bone to produce movement. Whereas other worms have circular muscles good for inchworming along, nematodes have longitudinal muscles for whip-like movement. All nematodes do an undulating sine wave kind of motion, none of that inchworm stuff that we've seen so far in the flatworms. And this makes the nematodes much more mobile than the flatworm parasites that we've been seeing so far. As a result of having that hydrostatic skeleton, there's a really strong internal pressure inside of that nematode cuticle. And this is the result of continued production of hemolymph, which keeps the nematode stiff and turgid and not flaccid like a flatworm. The cuticle of these guys can sometimes be really interesting. Not all nematodes have annuli or ridges on their cuticles, but some do. And this improves the strength and resilience of the cuticle, and it also helps with traction on slippery surfaces. Now, most nematode species are dioecious. They have separate sexes. Females are typically larger, and the males often have a curled tail. You can see that in this diagram. The female is bigger, and that's partially because she needs to produce eggs. Eggs take up a lot of space, particularly if they're provisioned with yolk. The bigger the female is, the more eggs she can produce. The male can afford to be a little bit smaller because sperm are compact and expendable because they cost little energy to produce. A telltale sign of a male is if you can see these structures at the posterior end called copulatory spicules, which are exactly what they sound like. They're used in copulation to pierce the female and facilitate the passage of sperm from the male into the female. Most nematode species have one-host life cycles, meaning that they're directly transmitted using only one host species and being passed from one host to another host of the same species, although there are exceptions to this, as we'll discuss. For now, let's focus on the prototypical nematode life cycle. Nematodes generally start their lives in the gut of a vertebrate. They're pooped out as eggs, those eggs hatch, and they go through several different larval stages. Between each larval stage, they go through a molt, or ecdysis, to move from one larval stage into the next. Typically, the third larval stage is what's infectious back to the host. So there's only one host species in this nematode life cycle, but there are several stages that the parasite passes through, including L1, L2, L3, and L4 stages. That L stands for larval. Sometimes you'll see it as J1, J2, J3, standing for juveniles. It's typically the L3 or the J3 stage that is infectious to the definitive host, and that can be ingested, or sometimes that worm actually penetrates the skin of its next host. So these guys typically have direct life cycles because they're moving from one host of a particular species to another host of that same species. These are not complex life cycle parasites. These are not parasites whose life cycles involve hosts of multiple species. Now, there are exceptions because there are some nematodes that have complex life cycles, but for most nematode species, the life cycle is direct. Okay, that's the life cycle. But once they get into their host, what are they eating? Well, nematodes eat blood, host cells, host fluids, and intestinal contents. They feed extravagantly and wastefully. These nematodes don't care too much about wasting their host's resources, so they can cause a lot of damage in the course of doing their feeding. They let a lot of perfectly good host blood leak out without being eaten because there's always more where that came from. That's why we call them both extravagant and wasteful. These worms have lots of anatomical elaborations to help with feeding. Some nematodes have lips, like the human roundworm, Ascaris lumbricoides, which has 3 lips surrounding the opening to its mouth. Some of them have teeth, like this guy. Yikes, not an inviting maw to be staring down. Or their teeth can be elaborated into cutting plates, like this terrifying hookworm. You can see that the hookworm has these 2 teeth that are shaped like cutting plates, and it uses those teeth to slice away at the intestinal epithelium of its human host, causing blood to flow directly into its mouth. Some nematodes have buccal capsules, which are specialized esophageal structures that let them create a lot of suction pressure and suck in food. That's important when you're a nematode because remember that your body is under intense hydrostatic pressure. So to bring food in, you have to create suction that overcomes the internal pressure of your body. Finally, nematodes may have other kinds of buccal armament, like stylets for piercing the host's tissues and getting fluids flowing. Now, the phylogeny of the nematodes is really, really complicated. It is constantly changing as we learn more about the relationships among the nematodes, and there are tons and tons of branches. Part of the reason for this is that there are so many nematode species, and another reason is that we're starting to get DNA sequences to supplement the use of morphology to build these phylogenies. And that means that we're sometimes learning that nematode groups that look really similar to one another are actually only distantly related. And nematode groups that look really different from one another are actually closely related. In this series, we're not going to pay too much attention to the interrelationships within the phylum Nematoda, because those relationships are really complicated and they're still in flux. But the one thing I do want you to understand about the nematodes is that they are not 100% parasitic. In fact, free-living and parasitic species can be mixed into the very same clades. In this phylogeny, you can see that the clades marked with a green plant icon are plant parasites. Red icon, vertebrate parasites. Purple icon, invertebrate parasites. The yellow icon means that they are invertebrate associates, either commensals or mutualists. The multicolored icon means that they are free-living predators, and you can see that there are plenty of free-living species at the bottom, mixed in with some plant and vertebrate parasites. At the top, there's a whole mess, indicating clades that contain all of the life history strategies. We've seen a number of groups that are 100% parasitic, like the class Nematoda, the class Monogenea, and the class Cestoda. There is no such uniformity among the nematodes. The strategy of parasitism has evolved many, many times in the phylum Nematoda, and therefore it's scattered all across the tree of nematode life, just like apples on an apple tree. In fact, in total, only about 60% of the species in the phylum Nematoda are parasitic, and the remainder are free-living. Now, the nematodes are very well represented among the parasites that affect people. Recall that the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, or IHME, tallies up the burden of these diseases every year. Let's go back to their graphic, which shows us the burdens for each neglected tropical disease. A number of diseases caused by the nematodes are sufficiently burdensome to show up on this chart. First up, the geohelminths, a triumvirate of intestinal misery. They include Ascaris lumbricoides, otherwise known as the human roundworm, alongside hookworm disease, caused by Necator americanus and Ancylostoma duodenale, and trichuriasis, which is caused by the human whipworm Trichuris trichiura, all intestinal parasites, all called geohelminths because we humans contract them from soil. LF stands for lymphatic filariasis, caused by the human filarial nematodes, primarily Wuchereria bancrofti. And finally, onchocerciasis, otherwise known as river blindness, caused by Onchocerca volvulus, a filarial nematode that causes intense, unremitting itchiness, followed by total blindness. As you can see, the nematodes are very well represented on this IHME tally of human suffering. Let's learn why. I'll see you in the next video.